Alright family, quick question. Do you know the story about Freedom's Fort and how it got its name? February 21st, time for more Black Excellence during Black History Month. Again, today's subject is Freedom's Fort, aka Fort Monroe. If you don't know, you're about to know. For those of you who don't know, Fort Monroe, aka Freedom's Fort, was a Union stronghold that sat on the southern tip of the Virginia Peninsula during the Civil War. Then in 1861, an event would occur that would give it its so-called name. On May 23rd, 1861, 3 slaves would escape from Sewell's Point, which was a Confederate stronghold just across the James River that would use slaves to build ornaments for the Confederate Army. The slaves, Frank Baker, Shepard Mallory, and James Townsend, would go on steal a boat to row across the James River to seek asylum on Fort Monroe because they did not want to be forced deeper into the South now that the Confederacy had seceded from the U.S. And the Union general who was in charge of Fort Monroe at this time and received these slaves was Mr. Benjamin F. Butler. Now the issue is, before the Civil War, any runaway slave was considered a fugitive slave and would be required by law to be returned to wherever they came from, regardless of situation, without question. But because the Confederates considered themselves and said they were not citizens of the U.S., they were their own nation and their own citizens, Butler decided that he was going to use this logic against them. The following morning on May 24th, Butler would meet with Confederate Major John B. Carey, who was filling in for Colonel Mallory just for this meeting. Carey would demand a return of slaves, and Butler stated if Colonel Mallory swore allegiance to the Union rather than the Confederacy, he would give back his property. And much like you'd expect, the Confederate Colonel Mallory refused. And when that happened, Butler declared the individuals no longer slaves, but now contrabands of war, no different than any other ornaments getting lost in the heat of battle. Now, although they weren't fully free, being considered contraband was actually better than being just labeled a slave. And soon, the word of their escape spread like wildfire. So much so that over the next few days, 47 slaves actually escaped from Sewell's Point to Fort Monroe, including a 3-month-old baby. And then by July of 1861, more than 850 slaves had escaped to Fort Monroe, earning it the nickname Freedom's Fort. Because of their interim status as contraband, these slaves essentially helped force the hand into making President Lincoln sign in the Emancipation Proclamation and putting it into effect on January 1st, 1863. And in honor of those slaves essentially forcing their hand in the play of freedom, here's today's quote. Nobody in the world, nobody in history has ever gotten their freedom by appealing to the moral sense of the people who are oppressing them. Assata Shakur.